In this video, we're going to explain where the quadratic formula comes from. So remember that we have to complete the square in order to do this. So the quadratic formula gives us a solution to the general quadratic equation, ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0, where a, b, and c are any real numbers and a is not 0. So the very first thing that we want to do is rewrite this as a times the quantity x squared plus b over a times x plus c equals 0. Now, what are we doing here? Well, what we did is we took an a and we factored it out of the first two terms here. So remember, factoring is just dividing. So if we factor something out, we're really dividing it. So if we take ax squared, factor out the a, in other words, divide by an a, what do we get? We get x squared. If we take bx and factor out an a, in other words, divide by an a, what do we get? We just get b over a times x. So that's why we have b over a times x here. And we're only doing it on the first two terms, not on the third term. So c just stays c. And we have to be careful to keep the c outside of the parentheses here. Okay, so let's go ahead and get rid of these over here. Okay, now continuing, what we want to do is complete the square inside of here. So let's go ahead and come off to the side separately and do that, just because it'll be a little bit easier, a little cleaner. So x squared plus b over a times x. Now we want to turn this into something squared. Well, let's not do it like this. So we want to turn it into, or we would just want to complete the square. So what does that mean? What are we going to have to do? What we're going to have to do is rewrite this as x plus, okay, we have a plus sign here because here we have a plus over here, so plus plus, something, quantity squared, and then minus something else. Now, remember, completing the square says you take the coefficient on the x, and then you divide it by 2. So if coefficient on the x is b over a, if we divide that by 2, okay, if we divide that by 2, that's like multiplying by half, which is just b over 2a. So this here is b over 2a. And then completing the square says you subtract that same thing you just added, but you have to square the whole thing. Okay, so that's just a property, or that's just how completing the square works. So you take, if you have nothing in front of the x squared, or just a 1 in front of the x squared, like we do here, take the coefficient on the x divided by 2, that gives us b over 2a. And then since we added that in here, we have to subtract it out here, but squared, b over 2a quantity squared. This is so that we can balance everything out, because if we expand this whole thing out, what we're going to end up with is x squared plus blah 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 plus b over 2a quantity squared. So we have to subtract the b over 2a quantity squared to make that balance. Okay, so let's just simplify that real quick. That's going to become x plus b over 2a quantity squared minus b squared over 4a squared. Okay, so now we're going to take this and stick it back on in here. Now notice that what we did was we took this expression in the parentheses and off to the side worked with that. So x squared plus b over a times x, this whole thing inside the parentheses equals this entire thing right here. Okay, because we worked inside the parentheses there. Okay, so now what we have is a times, so I'm going to change the square brackets now because we already have parentheses in here. A times the whole quantity, x plus b over 2a, that quantity squared, and then minus b squared over 4a squared. Okay, and close bracket, and then we have plus c equals 0. Now let's go ahead and distribute the a. So if we distribute the a, we end up with a times the quantity, x plus b over 2a, quantity squared, and then minus, so if we take b squared over 4a squared and multiply it by an a, then that a cancels with one of the a's in the bottom. So we just end up with b squared over 4a. And then we still have the plus c hanging out by itself out there. And then let's get rid of this here. And then that whole thing still equals 0. Okay. Now, so the tricky part's pretty much over, because the tricky part, or really the hard part, sort of the messiest part, is completing the square there. So let's go ahead and get rid of all this now. And we'll come up off to the side. Or we'll come back to the top here, rather. So now what we're going to do is subtract c from both sides and add b squared over 4a to both sides. So in other words, what we're just going to say is a times the quantity x plus b over 2a squared equals, b squared over 4a minus c. So minus b squared over 4a plus c, if we move everything to the other side, that becomes positive b squared over 4a, and then minus c. Okay, now let's go ahead and put this all into one fraction. So in other words, get a common denominator. So if we have b squared over 4a and then minus c, then what we can do is take c and multiply it by, let's change colors, multiply that by 4a over 4a. Okay, so then this becomes a times x plus b over 2a, whole thing squared, equals b squared over 4a minus 4ac over 4a. Okay, so now we can squish those into one fraction, so I'm going to do this just to save space. So b squared over 4a minus 4ac over 4a. Let's get rid of this and combine everything into one. So actually, no, you know what? Let's not do that. It's going to be kind of messy. So let's just go to the next line. Sorry. A times the quantity x plus b over 2a, whole thing squared, equals b squared minus 4ac, all divided by 4a. Okay, now we divide everything by a. So if we divide both sides by a, the a over here on the left goes away. And what we're left with is x plus b over 2a squared equals b squared minus 4ac, all divided by 4a squared. Okay, so if we have this expression over here, blah, 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 divided by 4a, and if we divide by a again, remember dividing by a is like multiplying by 1 over a, so if you multiply by 1 over a, we're going to get 4a squared on the bottom. Okay, that's where the 4a squared comes from. Now what we have to do is take the square root of both sides, but we have to be very careful. Okay, first of all, why are we taking the square root of both sides? Because now we have this whole expression squared by itself on one side, so we take the square root of both sides. And why do we have to be careful? Because when we take the square root of both sides, we have to remember to account for the positive and the negative root. So we're totally out of space, so let's remove some of this stuff over here. Okay, so what we have is the square root of the quantity x plus b over 2a squared, squared, equals the square root of b squared minus 4ac, all divided by 4a squared. So this says x plus b over 2a equals plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, all divided by what? Well, on the bottom we have square root of 4a squared, which is 2a, so we have 2a down here. Okay. Now, technically we should have a plus or minus 2a, but we already have a plus or minus up here, so we don't need to have it again. Okay, so there's really no need to have a plus or minus on the top and the bottom, because it's already accounted for just by having it at the top. Okay, so now there's a couple of simple small steps left. Subtract b over 2a from both sides, and we get x equals negative b over 2a. And then we have plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac divided by 2a. Now notice we already have a common denominator, it's 2a, so we can just combine these into 1, and we get x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, all divided by 2a. Now be very careful that we keep this minus sign on the b and not off to the side over here. Okay, the minus sign doesn't go over here, it goes right here next to the b in the numerator. So x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, all divided by 2a. And that is the quadratic formula there. And this shows how we derive that by completing the square and doing some ugly algebraic manipulations.